Serra, Part 10. What happened to those missions of Serra, the 9 that he founded, and then by 1821 there were 21 total after his death that they had in existence in California? There were ramifications. One of them was the growing effect of the lack of immunity of the natives to the diseases that the Europeans were bringing to this land. This happens all over North and South America, so that's not a surprise to us, but it had its effect. Secondly, there were political ramifications that were going on, that the control of the imperial Spanish government was constantly being chipped away at. And it's interesting, by 1831, we have, 1833 I should say, we have the reality that Mexico has made itself independent of the Spanish crown. It's his own country, and part of Mexico is this California coast. It's all part of the Mexican area, according to what happens politically. And by 1833, the government of Mexico secularizes and in a sense eliminates the whole control of the Franciscans and their missions, the mission fathers, the padres over the natives, turns them all almost into, you might say, secular pueblos. They're to have mayors. There's an influx of expropriators that come from Mexico, families. They realize now they could have control over these lands, some of them very productive, and sadly what the padres had never envisioned starts to take place, that the natives were either wiped out or driven off their ancestral territories. And this was really done after the Spanish crown has left the area. So we can't even blame the Spanish crown for it. It's really the independence of Mexico that starts the whole, you might say, rush into this area. And then by, as you and I know, 1848, the gold rush, the vast amount of people from the United States crossing over, taking over California. Mexico finally relents. California becomes a republic for a short time. Did you know that? It was the Republic of California. And then finally, in 1850, it becomes part of the United States, and ends, in a sense, the relationship of the padres to the natives, the whole structure that they had set up. Whatever you might say, the remnants of faith are there, the churches are there, the baptized are there, but it's a whole different situation for the people of California. Now, as we know, Junipero Serra ends his days at Monterey. Ends his days at Mount Carmel. And he was very weak back in the August of 1784. He takes communion, viaticum. It's interesting. Viaticum is supposed to be the last sacrament of communion we receive, usually in your sickbed. But Junipero Serra got up with the help of soldiers and walked to the church. He said, I will go to my Lord. The Lord's not going to come to me. So he comes to communion, and this communion service must have been something else. I mean, they had incense going. It was almost like benediction. And it's Junipero Serra that intones Tantum ergo sacramentum to the whole congregation, sings as he receives the Holy Eucharist. And he dies the next day, probably from coronary thrombosis. But before he dies, he asks that the words of the final commendation, the words we actually still use today, as someone is about to die, it starts with the words, "Go forth, O Christian soul, from this world." It's a beautiful prayer. And he heard that prayer. He said, "Thanks be to God." And he went and he died. But it's interesting what happened subsequently. The natives flock to the mission, even as he's dying. Tears are flowing. People are looking in on his room. They come to his coffin. His ceremony, the the ceremony that takes place at the Mission San Carlos Borromeo de Carmelo near Monterrey is a funeral like one would never have imagined, probably for a friar, a Franciscan. It was really a state funeral in a way, and a deeply Catholic Mass. Because it was interesting that as the Requiem Mass was being chanted in the chapel, the cannons of the supply ship in the bay, every half hour the guns of the Presidio responded to the cannons as they went off to announce and to salute Padre Presidente. So you have to sort of sense this man was a religious figure, but he's also part of the colonial institution in a way that was quite evident in even his burial, because after the funeral mass they carried him around taking turns, the army and the navy, to 4 stations outside the church so that everybody could see the body as they took him around. Then they took him within the church and they buried him in the sanctuary of the church, as is the custom, as you know, like bishops are always buried in their cathedral, so was he. Let me read to you the last words of his diarist, you might say, Francisco Paulo, Father Paulo, who followed him from Majorca, all the way being the companion. He said, the ceremony was concluded with a sung response, but the tears, sighs, and cries of those assisting drowned out the voices of the chanters. The sons were lamenting the death of their father, who, having left his own aging parents in his homeland of Majorca, had come to this distant place, California, for the sole purpose of making them his spiritual children and children of God through holy baptism. This was Junipero Serra's finest epitaph.